Early the next morning, Malcolm Carter stepped out of his mansion and stopped in his tracks. Malcolm Carter was one of the most respected businessmen in Atlanta, a quiet, disciplined widower, known as much for his wealth as for the walls he had built around his heart. At 38, he lived in a sprawling estate with his 10-year-old twin daughters, Nia and Noelle, and very few people ever saw disorder touch his world. But that morning, disorder was lying right in front of his gate. A woman. She was curled beside the black iron entrance, as if the night had dropped her there and forgotten to come back for her. Her clothes were worn, her shoes dusty, and her face looked tired in the kind of way that told a long story without saying a word. Malcolm frowned and took 2 slow steps forward. For a second, he thought she might be sick. Then he saw the rise and fall of her chest. She was only sleeping, or maybe she had collapsed from pure exhaustion. He glanced toward the security booth, already prepared to question how anyone had allowed this, when 2 small voices called out behind him. "Daddy?" He turned to see Nia and Noelle standing on the front steps in matching pink pajamas. Nia, the quieter of the 2, held her robe close as she peered toward the gate with curious brown eyes. Noelle, brighter and more playful, leaned forward with open concern written all over her face. Both girls had followed him outside before the nanny could stop them. Malcolm raised a brow. "Why are you 2 out here this early?" Noelle ignored the question and pointed at the woman. "Who is that?" "I don't know," Malcolm said. "Go back inside." But the twins didn't move. Nia studied the woman carefully, then looked up at him. "Is she okay?" "I'm about to find out." Malcolm stepped closer again, but just as he bent slightly, Noelle hurried down 2 steps and called out, "Daddy, don't wake her up." He paused. Noelle's voice softened. "She looks really tired." Nia nodded. Maybe she didn't have anywhere else to go. For a moment, Malcolm said nothing. Children had a way of seeing people before status, before appearance, before judgment. And standing there in the early morning light, his daughters were looking at a stranger with the kind of mercy most adults had forgotten. He straightened up and called toward the house. "Loretta." A few seconds later, Miss Loretta Jenkins appeared at the door. She was the Carter family's longtime housekeeper, a warm but firm woman in her late 50s who had helped raise the twins with steady hands and sharp wisdom. "Yes, Mr. Carter?" "Have 2 staff members bring her inside. Get the guest room ready. Make sure she's cleaned up, fed, and seen by the doctor." Loretta blinked once, surprised, then nodded. "Right away." As the staff carefully approached the sleeping woman, Malcolm looked at her one more time. There was something about her face. Even beneath the weariness, it carried a strange softness, a peace he couldn't explain, and for some reason he didn't like, it made him look twice. Noelle smiled. "Thank you, Daddy." Malcolm turned away before the girls could study his expression. "Inside, both of you." This time they obeyed. Minutes later, the woman was carried into the mansion, still half-conscious, still unaware of where she was, and upstairs, in a guest room bigger than anything she had likely known in years, she finally opened her eyes. She sat up in alarm, staring at the high ceiling, the polished furniture, the cream-colored curtains dancing in the breeze. Fear tightened across her face. She had no idea where she was, and she had no idea that the house she had entered by accident was about to change her life forever. The following morning, the woman woke to the soft clink of a tray being set down beside her bed. She jerked upright, eyes wide, her breathing quick and uneven. For a moment she did not know where she was. The room was large, quiet, and beautiful in a way that felt almost unreal. Sunlight poured through tall cream curtains. The bed beneath her was soft enough to make her feel guilty. Even the air smelled clean. Then the door opened wider, and the woman carrying the tray gave her a calm look. It was Miss Loretta Jenkins, the Carter family's longtime housekeeper. She was the kind of woman who spoke gently, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen enough in life to recognize pain when it walked into a room. "You're awake," Loretta said. "That's good. You gave us a little scare." The woman swallowed hard. "Where am I?" "In the Carter home," Loretta replied. "Mr. Malcolm Carter found you sleeping at the front gate yesterday morning and brought you in." The woman blinked, trying to gather her thoughts. Then shame rushed over her face, so fast it almost made her dizzy. I'm sorry," she said, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I should go." Loretta shook her head. "You'll do no such thing, not until you can stand without looking like the wind might knock you over." The woman lowered her eyes. "My name is Naomi Brooks." It was the first time anyone in that house had heard her name. Naomi Brooks was 32, with tired eyes that still held traces of quiet strength. Even after hardship had worn down her body, there was something steady about her, something gentle that had not fully broken. Loretta gave a small nod. "Well, Miss Naomi Brooks, you're safe here for now. Eat first, worry later." Naomi looked down at the tray. Tea, toast, scrambled eggs, real food. For a second, her throat tightened. She could not remember the last time someone had prepared a meal for her without asking for something in return. Before she could speak, another voice floated in from the hallway. "Can we come in now?" The twins appeared a second later, peeking around the door with matching curiosity. Nia stepped in first, slower and more careful. Noelle followed close behind, already smiling. "These are Mr. Carter's daughters," Loretta said. "Nia and Noelle." Naomi looked at them properly for the first time, and something strange passed through her chest. She could not name it. It was not pain exactly, not joy either, just a pull, quiet, deep, and unsettling. Noelle tilted her head. "Do you feel better?" "A little," Naomi said softly. Nia moved closer to the bed. "I told Daddy you looked tired, and I told him not to wake you," Noelle added proudly, as if this were a major achievement. To Naomi's surprise, a weak smile touched her face. "Then I guess I should thank both of you." The girls beamed. A short while later, Malcolm entered the room. He looked as composed as he had the morning before, dressed in a crisp dark shirt and tailored slacks, every inch the controlled man Naomi would have expected to own a place like this. "This is Malcolm Carter," Loretta said, though Naomi had already guessed. Naomi immediately sat straighter. "Thank you, sir, for helping me." Malcolm gave a brief nod. "You needed help, that's all." His tone was polite, but distant. Not cold exactly, just careful, like a man who had long ago learned not to let too much reach his heart. Naomi glanced toward the edge of the bed. "I appreciate it, but I don't want to be a burden. I can leave today." "No," Noelle said quickly. Nia nodded. "You should stay until you're stronger." Malcolm looked at his daughters, then back at Naomi. "You may stay a few more days," he said, "until you're fully steady." Naomi opened her mouth to protest, but the twins' hopeful faces stopped her. "Thank you," she said quietly. As Malcolm turned to leave, Noelle whispered to Nia, not nearly quietly enough, "I like her." Nia whispered back, "Me too." Naomi looked down to hide the emotion rising in her face. She had only just entered the Carter mansion, but already something in that house was beginning to shift. By the third day of Naomi's stay, the Carter mansion no longer felt like a dream. It felt stranger than that, because the house was beautiful, yes. Every hallway gleamed, every window shone, every piece of furniture looked chosen by people who had never needed to count the cost of anything. But beneath all that beauty, Naomi began to notice something else. The place was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. Not the kind that came from rest. This was the kind of silence that lived in rooms where people had learned to hold things in. It sat at the breakfast table. It followed footsteps down the hall. It lingered even after laughter, as if joy was only allowed to visit, not stay. That morning, Naomi sat at the edge of the guest room bed, folding the borrowed robe Miss Loretta had given her, when a light knock sounded at the door. Before she could answer, Noelle peeked in. "Are you awake?" she asked, "or just grown-up awake?" Naomi blinked, then smiled despite herself. "I think I'm awake." Noelle grinned and pushed the door wider. Nia stood behind her holding a workbook against her chest. "We came to get you," Nia said. "It's breakfast." Naomi's smile faded into uncertainty. "Oh, I shouldn't." "You should," Noelle said quickly, "because if you don't come, Daddy will just drink coffee and read things on his tablet, and Nia will be quiet and I'll have nobody fun to look at." Naomi laughed softly before she could stop herself. A few minutes later, she followed the girls downstairs. The dining room was large and elegant, with a long, polished table that could have seated 12 comfortably. Malcolm sat at one end in a charcoal suit, reading something on a tablet beside his coffee. He looked up when Naomi entered, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," Naomi replied carefully. Miss Loretta, standing near the sideboard, gave Naomi a reassuring look. "Come on, sit down." Naomi hesitated until Nia took her hand and led her to a chair closer to the girls than to Malcolm. It was such a small gesture, but it warmed her in a place she had forgotten still existed. Breakfast began quietly, too quietly. The twins ate with good manners, but Naomi noticed how often they glanced toward their father before speaking, as though the rhythm of the whole room depended on his mood. Malcolm, for his part, was attentive. He made sure Noelle drank her juice. He reminded Nia not to skip her eggs. He asked about school schedules and piano practice. He was present, but still distant, like a man who loved deeply but carefully. Halfway through breakfast, Noelle pushed her math worksheet across the table toward Naomi. "I got stuck on number 6, she said. "It looks rude." Naomi looked down. "A math problem looks rude." Noelle nodded seriously. "It has too many numbers and no manners." Even Malcolm's mouth twitched. Naomi bent over the page and explained the problem slowly. Noelle listened with exaggerated concentration, while Nia leaned closer, pretending not to be interested, but clearly following every word. When Naomi finished, Noelle gasped. "That makes so much sense." Nia looked at Naomi with quiet admiration. "You're really good at explaining things." Something in Naomi softened. Later that evening, as she passed the twins' room on her way back from the kitchen, she heard their voices through the half-open door. "Dear God," Nia whispered, "thank you for today." "And please," Noelle added, "send us somebody who will really love us, like a real mum." Naomi stopped where she was, her hand tightened against the wall. For a long moment she could not move. Then quietly, so no one would hear, Naomi turned away and walked back down the hallway, with tears gathering in her eyes. Because in that rich, polished house, 2 little girls were still praying for something money had never been able to give them. The following afternoon, the twins left for school, and for the first time since Naomi entered the Carter mansion, the house felt still enough for questions to rise. She found Miss Loretta in the kitchen, arranging fresh flowers in a glass vase. Even there, the older woman moved with purpose, like someone who had long ago learned how to keep a house standing, even when hearts inside it were falling apart. Naomi lingered near the doorway for a moment before speaking. "Miss Loretta," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" Loretta looked up and gave her a knowing smile. I had a feeling you would. Naomi stepped farther in. Mr. Carter, he loves those girls very much. He does, Loretta said at once. But he also seems… Naomi searched for the right word. Far away. Loretta's hand slowed over the flowers. For a second, her face changed, not with surprise, but with the weight of an old story. That's because a part of him is still living somewhere he can't return from. Naomi frowned slightly. Loretta wiped her hands on a towel and motioned for Naomi to sit. You should understand the kind of house you walked into. Naomi took a seat at the small kitchen table. Malcolm Carter wasn't always like this, Loretta began. Before, this place had more light in it, more laughter. He had that because of his wife. Naomi listened quietly. Her name was Danielle Carter, Loretta continued. She was beautiful, warm, and full of life. Not just pretty to look at, but the kind of woman who made people feel seen. She and Malcolm loved each other deeply. You could tell just by the way he said her name. Naomi lowered her eyes. What happened? Loretta exhaled slowly. They got married. Big wedding. Beautiful day. Everybody said they looked blessed, but on their way to their honeymoon. She paused. There was an accident. Danielle didn't survive. Naomi's hand tightened in her lap. For a long time after that, Malcolm barely spoke unless he had to. He handled business. He took care of what needed doing. But emotionally? Loretta shook her head. That man buried himself with his wife and just left enough of himself above ground to keep breathing. Naomi felt a quiet ache settle in her chest. And the girls? She asked. Loretta nodded. He loves them fiercely. He would give them the moon if he could. But grief changes people. Sometimes it makes love quieter than it was meant to be. Before Naomi could respond, the sound of firm heels echoed from the hallway. A woman entered the kitchen without knocking. She was elegant, poised, and carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Her silver-streaked hair was styled neatly, and her sharp eyes moved across the room like they expected everything to be in order. This is Evelyn Carter, Loretta said. Mr. Carter's mother. Evelyn's gaze landed on Naomi at once. So this is the woman from the gate. Naomi stood quickly. Good afternoon, ma'am. Evelyn gave a small nod, but her expression did not soften. I heard you're feeling better. Yes, ma'am. That's good, Evelyn replied. Recovery is important. So is knowing when one has overstayed a kindness. Loretta's face tightened, but she said nothing. Naomi swallowed. I understand. Evelyn's eyes lingered on her another second. Then she turned and left as suddenly as she had arrived. Silence filled the kitchen after her departure. Loretta muttered under her breath. That woman could frost a window in July. Naomi almost smiled, but her thoughts were elsewhere. That evening, as the sky darkened outside, Malcolm walked alone into a room Naomi had not noticed before. Its doors had been closed since she arrived. Curious, she passed by, quietly, and glanced in. On the far wall hung a large portrait of a smiling woman in white. Danielle. Malcolm stood before it without moving, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable and unbearably tired. In that moment, Naomi understood something important. This was not just a rich man's house. It was a house where grief had been given its own room. And somehow, without meaning to, she had already begun bringing sound back into its silence. That night, after seeing Malcolm standing before Danielle's portrait, Naomi returned to her room with a heaviness she could not explain. She lay down, but sleep did not come gently. It came like a door thrown open. In her dream, everything was white. White walls, white sheets, white lights so bright they hurt her eyes. Somewhere close by, babies were crying. tiny, fragile cries that seemed to reach straight into her chest. Naomi turned in the dream, desperate, confused, aching with a pain too deep for words. She tried to move toward the sound, but invisible hands seemed to hold her back. Then she saw them, two tiny babies wrapped in soft blankets, carried away before she could even hold on. "Please," she cried out in the dream. "Please, just let me see them again." She woke with a gasp. The room was dark, except for a slice of moonlight on the carpet. Her face was wet. Her chest rose and fell too quickly. For a few seconds, she did not know where she was. Then the soft bed, the quiet walls, and the unfamiliar comfort of the Carter mansion returned to her. Naomi pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. The dream had felt too real. The next morning, Miss Loretta found her standing by the window, already dressed, but unusually pale. Loretta studied her face for a moment. "You didn't sleep well?" Naomi tried to smile. "Was it that obvious?" Loretta crossed the room and set a folded towel on the chair. "Child, some pains don't stay hidden, no matter how politely you carry them." Naomi looked down. Loretta's voice softened. "You don't have to tell me everything, but one day, what's buried too deep has a way of asking to be heard." For a moment, Naomi said nothing. Then she walked slowly to the edge of the bed and sat. "There was a time," she said quietly, "when I thought if I just endured enough, everything would turn out right in the end." Loretta pulled up a chair and sat across from her. Naomi clasped her hands together tightly. "I had one person in my life who mattered more than anything, my younger brother." Her voice changed when she spoke of him, softer and more wounded all at once. "His name is Jalen Brooks. After our mother died, I did everything I could to raise him right. I made sure he ate before I did. I worked jobs I hated just so he could stay in school. I believed if he made it, if one of us made it, then maybe all the suffering would mean something." Loretta listened without interrupting. Naomi let out a shaky breath. "So when the moment came for me to help him, I did. I made a sacrifice that changed my whole life." Loretta's eyes narrowed gently, not in suspicion, but in concern. "And did he know what it cost you?" Naomi stared at her hands. "Not all of it." Before Loretta could answer, a burst of laughter sounded from the hallway. The twins. A second later, Noelle came rushing in, followed by Nia at a more graceful pace. "Miss Naomi," Noelle said, "can you settle something? Nia says turtles are wiser than cats." Nia folded her arms. "I said calmer, not wiser." Despite herself, Naomi smiled. Noelle climbed onto the bed without invitation, and Nia stood beside her with a workbook tucked under one arm. Their energy filled the room so quickly that the heaviness in Naomi's chest eased for just a moment. Then her eyes fell on the silver picture frame on the bedside table. It held an old photo of Nia and Noelle as babies, wrapped in matching blankets, their tiny faces peaceful in sleep. Naomi reached for the frame before she could stop herself. Her fingers trembled against the glass. Something sharp and aching moved through her all over again. Nia noticed. "You okay?" Naomi blinked quickly and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm okay." But as she stared down at the picture, a second longer, tears gathered silently in her eyes. Because somewhere deep inside, a pain she had spent years burying was beginning to wake. The following week, after the memory stirred awake inside Naomi, the past began rising in pieces she could no longer keep buried. Years earlier, long before she ever stood inside the Carter mansion, Naomi Brooks had been living in a cramped apartment on the south side of Atlanta with her younger brother, Jalen. Back then, life was simple in the hardest way. Bills piled up faster than hope. The refrigerator was never full for long, and every plan Naomi made seemed to depend on one question: how do I keep my brother's future alive? Jalen Brooks had always been the bright one. He was sharp, ambitious, and determined to become a lawyer. Naomi had poured herself into that dream as if it were her own. If he succeeded, she believed, then maybe their family story would not end in struggle. One humid evening, Jalen burst into their apartment holding a letter in both hands. "Naomi," he said, breathless, "I got it." She looked up from the table where she had been sorting overdue bills. "Got what?" "The acceptance." He handed her the paper with shaking fingers. "The law program in London. I got in." For one beautiful moment, joy erased everything else. Naomi jumped up, hugged him tightly, and laughed with tears in her eyes. But then reality followed. The tuition was high, travel costs were worse, and the deadline sat at the bottom of the page like a threat. Jalen noticed the shift in her face. "I know it's a lot," he said, quieter now. "Maybe I can defer." "No," Naomi said quickly. "You worked too hard for this." That night, after Jalen fell asleep on the couch, with the letter still in his hand, Naomi sat alone in the dim kitchen and prayed. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't know how, but please make a way." Across the city, in a very different world, Malcolm Carter was hearing a different kind of pressure. He sat in a private office with his mother, Evelyn Carter, his father, Charles Carter, family attorney Bernard Hayes, and Dr. Simone Whitfield, a trusted fertility specialist who had handled confidential matters for powerful families before. Malcolm looked tired before anyone even spoke. Charles Carter, stern and old-fashioned, folded his hands on the desk. "You have responsibilities, Malcolm." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "I already have responsibilities." "You have a name to carry," Evelyn said, "a legacy to preserve." "My wife is dead," Malcolm replied, his voice low and controlled. "That should have ended this conversation years ago." But Evelyn did not soften. "Your grief is not the issue. The future of this family is." Bernard Hayes cleared his throat carefully. "There is another option, a discreet arrangement, surrogacy." Malcolm leaned back, expression unreadable. Dr. Whitfield spoke gently. "It would allow you to have children without entering another marriage." The room fell quiet. Malcolm stared past them for a long moment, as if the very idea disgusted him and exhausted him at once. Finally, he said, "If this happens, I don't want to know who the woman is." Evelyn frowned slightly. "Malcolm, I mean it," he said. "No meetings, no names, no emotional complications." Bernard nodded. "It can be arranged." A few days later, Naomi sat in a clean medical office across from Dr. Whitfield, though at the time she did not know how closely that room was tied to the future waiting for her. "This arrangement is confidential," the doctor explained. "If you agree, you will carry a child for a family who wishes to remain anonymous." Naomi stared at her, stunned. "You want me to do what?" The number on the paper in front of her looked unreal. It could cover Jalen's tuition, his travel, his first months abroad. Her stomach turned. "That's too much," she whispered. "It is your decision," Dr. Whitfield said calmly. That night, Naomi prayed longer than she ever had before, and by morning, with trembling hands and tears she refused to let fall in public, she signed the contract. On the same day, in another office across the city, Malcolm Carter signed his own. Neither of them knew it then, but those two signatures had just bound their futures together. A few weeks after signing the contract, Naomi stepped into a season of her life she never could have imagined. The medical appointments began quietly. Blood tests, scans, instructions, forms. Everything was handled with the kind of polished secrecy that told her the family involved had both money and power. No names were mentioned, no personal details were shared, Naomi was simply told what to do, where to go, and when to show up. At first, she treated it the same way Malcolm had, like an arrangement, like a sacrifice with a deadline. But life had a way of becoming real before people were ready for it. One afternoon, after a follow-up appointment, Dr. Simone Whitfield studied Naomi's chart, then looked up with the smallest smile. "Well," she said, "I hope you're prepared for a surprise." Naomi frowned. "What kind of surprise?" Dr. Whitfield turned the screen slightly toward her. "You're carrying twins." For a second, Naomi forgot how to breathe. "Twins?" The doctor nodded. "Two healthy babies." Naomi looked at the image, blurry and strange and miraculous all at once. She had agreed to carry a child. One child. Somehow the news that there were two made the whole thing feel bigger, heavier, holier. When she got home, Jalen was at the table, surrounded by travel brochures and online forms. His face lit up when he saw her. "How did it go?" Naomi stood there for a moment, one hand resting lightly against her stomach. "It's twins," she said. Jalen's eyes widened. "Twins?" Then, almost immediately, his face shifted with excitement. "Naomi, that's incredible. This really changes everything." She noticed he said, "everything, not for you." Still, she smiled faintly and sat down. She wanted to believe all of it would be worth something good in the end. As the months passed, Naomi's body changed, but so did her heart. She tried at first not to think of the babies as hers in any way. She reminded herself constantly that she was helping a family. She was securing Jalen's future. She was doing what she had agreed to do. But at night, when the apartment was quiet and the world stopped asking things from her, she would place both hands over her belly and whisper softly, "You two behave in there." Sometimes she prayed over them. Sometimes she sang. Sometimes she simply sat still and listened to the strange, tender silence of love forming, where she had promised herself there would only be duty. Across the city, Malcolm kept his distance from every part of the process. Whenever Bernard Hayes updated him, Malcolm responded with short nods and practical questions. Was everything proceeding normally? Were the doctors satisfied? Were there any complications? He never asked about the woman. He never asked how she was feeling. To him, emotion still felt dangerous. Detachment felt safer. By the 7th month, Naomi walked more slowly, slept less easily, and felt every movement of the babies like a conversation she was not prepared to end. Missed calls from work piled up. Her back ached. Her ankles swelled. But when the babies kicked, she smiled no matter how tired she was. One rainy evening, she sat by the window in her small apartment, rubbing her stomach gently. "Whoever your father is," she murmured, "I hope he loves you right." The labor came 2 months later. It was long, painful, and exhausting. Naomi gripped the hospital sheets, cried, prayed, and pushed through wave after wave, until at last the room filled with the sharp, beautiful sound of newborn cries. 2 girls. 2 little girls. The nurse placed them in Naomi's arms for only a brief moment, long enough for her to see their tiny faces, long enough for something inside her to break open forever. "They're beautiful," she whispered, tears slipping down the sides of her face. Then they were taken. Naomi reached after them weakly, but the room had already begun moving on without her. In another wing of that same hospital, Malcolm Carter received the news in silence. "You have twin daughters," Bernard told him. Back in her room, Naomi turned her face into the pillow and wept for the babies she had carried, prayed over, and lost all in the same day. 10 years after the day Naomi gave birth, she finally stood face to face with the future she had once sacrificed everything to protect. Jalen Brooks had made it. He was no longer the skinny, hopeful boy who used to study under a flickering kitchen light. He was now a polished young attorney with tailored suits, expensive watches, and the kind of confidence that came from being welcomed into rooms Naomi had never even imagined entering. The first time Naomi visited his downtown office, she paused outside the glass building and stared up at it with tears in her eyes. This, she thought, was what all of it had been for. When she walked inside, the receptionist looked at her worn handbag, then at her shoes, then back at her face with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm here to see Jaylen Brooks," Naomi said softly. The receptionist typed something, then picked up the phone. A moment later, she said, "You can go up." Naomi stepped into the elevator with her heart pounding, not from fear, but from pride. Her little brother had done it. He had become the man he always said he would be. When she entered his office, Jaylen rose from behind a large desk, surprised. "Naomi," he said, adjusting his tie. "You should have called first." She smiled anyway. "I wanted to surprise you." Jaylen Brooks was 28 now, handsome, sharp, and clearly comfortable in success. But there was something in his eyes Naomi had not seen before. Distance, not tiredness, not stress, something colder. "I was nearby," Naomi said. "I thought maybe we could have lunch." Jaylen glanced toward the glass wall behind her, where junior associates moved busily past. "Today's not really good." Naomi's smile thinned. "Oh, okay, maybe another day." He gave a quick nod, already reaching for the file on his desk. "Yeah, another day." That should have warned her, but Naomi kept making excuses for him. He's busy, he's adjusting, success changes schedules. Then the calls started going unanswered. The money he once promised to send stopped coming. Messages were read and ignored. Weeks passed, then months. When Naomi finally reached him again, it was only through persistence. They met at a restaurant near his office, one far too expensive for her to have entered on her own. Jaylen arrived late. Naomi had already noticed the people around him when he walked in. Men in tailored coats, women in polished heels, the kind of crowd that judged worth in one glance. "Jaylen," she said when he sat down, relief and hurt colliding in her voice. "I've been trying to reach you." "I've been busy," he said. "For months?" He leaned back. "Naomi, my life is demanding now. Everything is moving fast." She stared at him. "I know, and I'm proud of you, but I'm your sister." Something flashed across his face, annoyance more than guilt. "You always say that like I owe you my whole life." Naomi blinked. "What?" Jaylen lowered his voice, but not his sharpness. "Every time you call, every time you show up, it feels like you want me to remember where I came from." "You should remember where you came from," Naomi said quietly. "There's no shame in that." "For you, maybe," he shot back, "but I had to get out of that life." The words landed like blows. Naomi stared at him across the table, suddenly unable to recognize the boy she had raised. "I gave up everything for you," she whispered. Jaylen's jaw tightened. "And I never asked you to hold that over my head forever." Naomi sat very still. The restaurant sounds blurred around her, dishes clinking, soft music playing, people laughing at nearby tables. But inside her, something had gone completely silent. She rose slowly. Jaylen didn't stop her. He didn't apologize. He didn't even stand. Naomi picked up her bag with trembling hands and walked out of the restaurant alone. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. But for her, everything had, because poverty had wounded her before. Loneliness had tested her before. But this was different. This was betrayal, wearing the face of the person she had loved most. And as Naomi walked down the crowded sidewalk with tears burning in her eyes, she realized something she had never wanted to believe. The brother she had sacrificed her life for had become a man ashamed of the sister who saved his. In the months that followed Jalen's rejection, Naomi's life began to come apart one piece at a time. At first, she still tried to hold things together. She took extra shifts wherever she could find them. Cleaning jobs, laundry work, temporary kitchen work, anything that paid enough to keep food on the table and rent within reach. But pain had a way of draining more than strength. It drained focus, it drained hope, and after a while, even simple things began to feel heavy. Naomi stopped sleeping well. Some nights she lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling, hearing Jalen's words over and over again. Other nights she slept too deeply and woke with tears on her face and no memory of what she had dreamed. She stopped eating regularly, bills piled up, deadlines passed. Then one afternoon, she returned to her apartment building and found an eviction notice taped to her door. She stood there for a long time, just looking at it, not crying, not speaking, just looking, as if maybe staring long enough could turn bad news into a misunderstanding. It didn't. By the end of that week, Naomi packed the few things she still had into 2 worn bags, some clothes, a Bible with a cracked brown cover, old papers she couldn't bring herself to throw away, and one small envelope holding hospital records she never had the courage to read for too long. After that, life became a string of temporary places. One shelter for 3 nights, a borrowed couch for 2 more, a church basement during a stormy weekend, then back to the streets in the daylight, carrying her bags and trying to look like someone who still knew where she was going. Atlanta felt different from that side of life. When you had nowhere to be, the city looked colder. People looked through you faster. Doors closed more easily. And pride, Naomi learned, could keep a person hungry far longer than hunger ever should. One Wednesday afternoon, after being turned away from a job she had hoped for, Naomi sat alone outside a small neighborhood church. Her shoulders slumped, her shoes ached, her stomach was empty. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly invisible. That was when an older woman stepped out of the church with a paper bag in her hand. She wore a simple blue dress and had the kind face that made people want to tell the truth around her. "You look like you need this more than I do," the woman said, holding out the bag. Naomi hesitated. "I'm okay." The woman smiled gently. "No, baby, you're surviving. That's not the same thing." Something in Naomi broke at those words. She took the bag with shaking fingers. Inside was a sandwich, an apple, and a small bottle of water. "Thank you," Naomi whispered. The woman sat beside her on the bench. "My name's Sister Helen." "Naomi." Sister Helen nodded. "Well, Naomi, I don't know what brought you here, but I do know this. God still sees you." Naomi looked down at the bag in her lap. "Sometimes it doesn't feel like it." "I know," Sister Helen said softly, "but feelings can lie when pain gets loud." Those words stayed with Naomi. That night, curled beneath a shelter blanket with her bags tucked close to her feet, Naomi pulled out her Bible and opened it with tired hands. She didn't read much. Her eyes were too full. Instead, she bowed her head and whispered a prayer so weak it was almost only breath. "Lord, I don't know where my life is going, but if you still see me, please don't let me disappear." A few days later, rain swept across the city in cold sheets. Naomi had been walking for hours, soaked through, hungry, and too tired to think straight. She turned down streets she didn't recognize, moving on instinct more than direction, until the neighborhood around her changed. The roads widened. The houses grew larger. Iron gates appeared where small porches used to be. She barely noticed. By then, her legs were trembling, and her vision had begun to blur at the edges. At last, she reached one tall black gate, steadied herself against the stone pillar beside it, and slowly sank to the ground. The rain softened. The street fell quiet, and with one arm wrapped around her bag and her cheek resting against the cold edge of the gate, Naomi Brooks closed her eyes. By morning, she would be found at the home of Malcolm Carter. The following morning, after being found at the gate and brought into the mansion, Naomi woke to a life that felt nothing like the one she had fallen asleep in. Over the next few days, strength returned to her slowly. Miss Loretta made sure of that. Every morning, the housekeeper checked on her with tea, warm food, and the kind of practical care that asked no unnecessary questions. Naomi was given clean clothes, a proper room, and enough quiet to let her body recover. At first, she moved through it all with caution, as if one wrong step might wake her from a dream and throw her back into the cold. But what surprised her most was not the room. It was the girls. Nia and Noelle had decided, without consulting anyone, that Naomi now belonged to their daily schedule. By breakfast, they were at her door. By late morning, they were asking if she liked pancakes, puzzles, or sunflowers. By afternoon, they had started bringing little pieces of their world to her: drawings, books, questions, tiny stories from school, and opinions about things no adult would think required discussion. "Miss Naomi," Noelle said one day, climbing onto the sitting room rug with dramatic seriousness. "If a person says they don't like mac and cheese, should you still trust them?" Nia sighed from the sofa. "She asks strange questions when she likes someone." Naomi laughed softly. "Then I suppose I should be honored." Nia, calmer and more observant than her sister, often watched Naomi before speaking. "Did you always know how to braid hair?" she asked one afternoon, while Naomi gently parted her curls. "No," Naomi said. "I learned by practicing." "On who?" Naomi paused only briefly. "Myself first, then family." Nia nodded, as if filing the answer away somewhere important. Little by little, Naomi found herself stepping into spaces that no one had invited her into formally, but where she was quietly needed. She tied ribbons before school. She reminded Noelle to slow down when reading instructions. She helped Nia organize her notes for a spelling test. She taught both girls to say thank you without mumbling, and how to bow their heads properly before prayer instead of peeking halfway through. It all came naturally, too naturally. One evening, Malcolm stood near the study doorway and watched Naomi kneeling beside the coffee table while the twins worked through homework. Malcolm Carter had spent years building order into his life. Since losing Danielle, he had learned to keep everything controlled: his business, his home, his grief. But this was different. Naomi did not command the room. She softened it, and somehow the girls listened to her in a way they rarely listened to hired help. Noelle held up her workbook. "I don't get this part." Naomi took the pencil. "Okay, let's look at it together. What's the first thing the question is asking?" Noelle frowned at the page. "To make me suffer." Nia giggled. Even Malcolm almost smiled. Later that night, when the twins had gone upstairs, Naomi stood in the kitchen rinsing a teacup when Malcolm walked in. "You've been helping them a lot," he said. Naomi turned. "I hope that's all right." "It is," he replied. "They seem lighter." Naomi lowered her eyes. "They're good girls." "They are." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Naomi said quietly, "They notice more than people think." Malcolm looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" "They're children," Naomi said, "but they can still feel when a house is carrying sadness." His expression shifted, just slightly. Naomi instantly wondered if she had gone too far. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "No," Malcolm said, his voice softer than usual. "You're not wrong." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was honest, and when Naomi finally left the kitchen, Malcolm remained where he was, one hand resting lightly on the counter. because for the first time in a long while, his daughters were laughing more. The house was warmer, and somehow, without trying, Naomi Brooks had become part of both. And that is where this part of the story ends. What Naomi went through was not just pain, it was sacrifice, betrayal, silence, and survival. She gave up more than most people ever could, and in the end, the very person she suffered for became ashamed of where he came from. That is what makes this story so painful. Her brother did not just forget struggle, he forgot the sister who carried him through it, and that leaves us with real questions. Was Jalen right in any way, or was what he did simply cruel? If you were in Naomi's place, would you ever accept a brother like that back into your life after everything? Could you forgive him, or would that kind of betrayal close the door forever? And here is another question that cuts even deeper. Would you carry a child you knew you might never see again just to help your brother succeed? Would you make that kind of sacrifice if it meant changing someone else's future while breaking your own heart? This story also reminds us that kindness matters, grief changes people, and children often feel truths adults try to hide. Naomi arrived broken, Malcolm was living broken, and somehow those broken roads led them into the same house for a reason. In my opinion, Naomi is one of the strongest characters in this story, not because she never fell, but because life kept crushing her, and she still remained gentle. And that kind of strength is rare. Now I really want to hear from you. Was Naomi too kind? Was Jalen unforgivable? And would you have made the same sacrifice she made? Comment part 2 if you want the next part. This is Mr. Hope, and I will see you in part 2.